You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week, we're going to look at the book of Titus, the letter to Titus. Zach, do you know where that is?
I had to look in the front of my Bible to find that.
Yeah. For those of you that don't know, if you pass Philemon, you've gone too far. As you're going through the New Testament, it's one of the letters attributed to Paul towards the end of his letters. Because if you didn't know, the letters are arranged in length from Romans to Philemon. So just a little bit of biblical trivia there. For those that don't think we actually look at the Bible, well, at least I do. I can't say anything about Mr.
To be fair, if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know my relationship with Paul.
Strained.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yes. So we're going to look at Titus today, chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. And so, Zach, I'm going to let you do what you do with the scripture reading.
Yeah, certainly. So hear this from the letter of Titus. The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all people. It educates us so that we can live sensible, ethical, and godly lives right now by rejecting ungodly lives and the desires of the world. At the same time, we wait for the blessed hope and glorious appearance of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. He gave himself for us in order to rescue us from every kind of lawless behavior and cleanse a special people for himself who are eager to do good actions. Matt, when you hear that reading out of Titus, what jumps out to you the most?
Salvation for all. To me, that's the key part. I mean, there's obviously other things, and I know we'll get to talking about that, but salvation for all, and then waiting for hope. And I think those are two things right now. Especially waiting for hope. I feel like we need a lot of hope right now in the world with all that's going on and everything. And I know we could say that about every generation and every time, but there does feel like a sense of hopelessness in the world. And to me, where do we find hope? Well, in Jesus. I mean, we can talk about that for days, but I think just hearing that salvation is for all is key to let go of some of those things that we might try to do, that God's grace is bigger than all of us and for all of us to understand. And so it's not for us to judge who's in and who's out. That's God's work. Our work is to really be grace givers and hope bringers into this world.
When I read this, not being a Paul apologist myself, this may be the clearest, most concise elevator speech of who Paul understands Christ to be, right? Paul gets a little long often when he's describing salvation and grace and hope and in Jesus throughout all of his letters. Paul writes in lists, right? There's just litany after litany after litany. But this is as concise as of Paul that you're probably going to find. There's grace for all people, and that grace educates us to be sensible, ethical, and godly, right? Rejecting evil, rejecting ungodly lives. That moves us towards hope, that moves us towards doing good, that moves us towards God. Maybe as Wesleyan, as Paul is going to be through his writing. There's a lot in here that jumps out that I really, really like, but Paul really puts it together in such a way, puts grace together in such a way that it moves us. He very clearly sees us moving closer to God in how we do and what we do in our actions, right? In how grace moves us towards action. And sometimes you get that with Paul, but in a lot more words, but like I said, for me, this is as concise as uh, Paul is in most of his writing, and I really like that. And as I give a long speech about being concise, right? We don't do that well. When we talk about grace, when we talk about hope, when we talk about what salvation is, and we talk about following Jesus, sometimes we're a little long. Sometimes we overcomplicate our faith. And I think this is a really good example of Paul not simplifying it, but approaching it in a way that all people can hear, right? All people can follow this model. All people can live into this, just as God's grace is for all people and moves us towards it. I don't know. I really like this section. There's a lot to it.
Yeah. In the Wesleyan Study Bible, I kind of love this line here that says, Wesley argues that God's grace saves us not only from the guilt of sin, but from its power.
Mm.
And I think sometimes we forget about that. That
right.
It's not like what we tell people all the time, like your sin is forgiven. and there's that pause, and then you wait for the words of assurance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in order for it to really be forgiven, in order for it to really be helpful, we have to be reminded, or need to be reminded, that we're also released from its power, and it doesn't have power over us anymore. And I think that that's key for us. And so, like, I've kind of fallen in love with this because it does remind us that that really God is in control of this, and that in reality, if we let go and recognize that sin no longer has power over us, and guilt no longer has power over us, and let that go, I think that's the hardest part. It's easy to say, yeah, I don't, I'm not bothered by it anymore. It's a whole other thing to let go of the power that it has over you, because that tends to be where we fall back into that disconnect between us and God.
Yeah. Well, I think another significant word here regarding the grace of God is it educates us so that we can live sensible, ethical, and godly lives. I don't think we talk about grace enough in those terms. We talk about grace in the sense of forgiveness, like you said. We talk about grace in the sense of hope, but sometimes we stop there. And when we talk about grace and we talk about salvation, we talk about hope, there's always, I think we leave something to be desired often, of like, oh, now like things are going to change, or magically everything is going to be different. And no, I mean, Paul lays it out here. Grace educates us so that we live into the sensibilities, we live into the ethical nature, we live into the godly and hopeful nature, right? And so it takes time. For me, that is a huge reminder that grace takes time, learning takes time. As good Wesleyans as we are, this is a lifetime's worth of faith, right? This is a lifetime of coming closer to God, of learning, of trial and error, right? Of ups and downs. And one, I think there's some permission there that as we live this life, yeah, shame and guilt no longer have the burden on us, right? There's forgiveness in that, and we don't have to be perfect. We're moving towards perfection.
Wouldn't you say then the Wesley's use the metaphor of the house is key to understand? But I always felt, when I always talk about the house, if for those of you who don't know Wesleyan thought and things like that, John Wesley utilized this house metaphor for understanding grace, and prevenient grace is being on the porch. It's that grace that we recognized before. I always say that the first 16 years of my life were God working on me and through me before I ever recognized it. And then year 17, when I said yes and did the give my life to Jesus, had baptism thing, I entered into sanctification and justified my life to say yes, but then also to recognize that I'm no longer held by that sin, and to move forward and to live a holy life, which is a lifelong process. And I always tell people that while we're in the house, as we're trying to do the best we can to keep our house holy and sacred, there are times that we go out the back door, and and we have to recognize those times, and that God's grace is always working on us. And so then we just it's kind of this cycle. But I think that when we choose to live that sanctified life, it challenges us, it pushes us to be ethical, it calls us out to live more like Jesus. And I think hearing those words that we're no longer held by that sin, I think would be key to make it healthier, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I overall think my very favorite part of this really is the fullness of grace. Doesn't just allow us to sit. Grace
Mm-hmm.
isn't just a get out of jail free card. Grace isn't just, it's not stagnant, right? And I think sometimes we allow it to be, or believe that it is. And Paul sums it up really perfectly, in my opinion. If you've been around me for even a hot second, do good is something I cling on to. Out of the 3 simple rules that we practice, do no harm, do good, attend to the ordinances of God. We're going to do it right. But do good is something, I mean, I sign my emails that way. That's something we lean on in the theology and our worship, that we're to go from this place and do. And that's what grace does. It makes us eager to go and do good. And that is a significant theological point in my life and my theology. And so that sticks out to me pretty significantly.
We did a 3 little series on grace
6 years ago.
About 6 years ago. They're on the Amplified Media deal, if you want to check that out. I think that's a great place to land, Zach. I think that understanding of doing good actions is, and I love that line, eager to do good actions.
Eager.
And I don't know about you, but and maybe, I mean, definitely chime in, but when you're around a new believer, they're eager, man. Like they're just on fire, and you want to, like, the tension is not to burn them out. Right. But like, how do we, like, I think a good thing to understand is, how do we remain eager as we've been seasoned veterans? And I think that's where going back and looking at our lives, asking ourselves, what's holding us back? What's got power over us that's really keeping us from being the person that God has crafted us to be?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And maybe the question where we land is, where is grace moving you? What is grace moving you to do? Where is grace calling you to go?
Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yeah. Or as I said on Sunday when talking about Amazing Grace, the hymn, work towards being more graceful in your lives, but also recognize that God is working on you and through you as you go about your week. And so I think those are 2 good places to land today.
Yeah, I like it.
So encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com. We've got a lot of great content and things up there for you. We had a friend that bought one of our onesies and shared a picture with us. Actually, and we have 2 little babies now that have onesies for Bearded Theologians. Those are always little great gifts for the kids, or even adults. If you can find an adult onesie, good for you. But check us out, like us, share us, comment on us, all at beardedtheologians.com. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.